60,000 people will disappear today, and you are about to be one of them. You're lying on a thin mattress, the air in the room is clinical and cold, and a person you just met is holding a clear plastic mask over your face. They tell you to count backward from 10. You think you'll make it to 1, but you're wrong. You won't even make it to 6. At the count of 7, the world doesn't fade, and it doesn't go dark. It simply ceases to be. You aren't going anywhere, because going implies a journey, a transition, or a sense of time passing. Instead, you are about to experience a physical paradox, a gap in your own existence where hours of surgery occur, your body is moved and cut and stitched, and yet, from your perspective, the count of 7 and the moment you wake up in recovery are the exact same second. You are participating in a medical miracle that we perform millions of times a year, yet the deeper we look into it, the more we realize that we are essentially inducing a controlled, temporary state of death. This is the mystery of general anesthesia, a state so strange that it challenges everything we think we know about the human soul. The lie begins with the language we use to describe it. When the anesthesiologist tells you it's time to go to sleep, they are lying to you. It's a polite, bedside lie intended to keep your heart rate from spiking, but scientifically, anesthesia and sleep are not even in the same zip code. Natural sleep is a highly active, rhythmic, and vital biological process. If we looked at your brain on an EEG while you were napping, we would see beautiful, rolling hills of electrical activity. Your brain cycles through REM and non-REM stages, processing memories, washing out metabolic waste, and reacting to the world around it. If a door slams, your brain hears it. If a fire alarm goes off, your brain wakes you up. But under general anesthesia, those rolling hills are flattened into a wasteland. Dr. Patrick Purdon, a renowned researcher at Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital, has spent years showing that anesthesia is actually much closer to a reversible drug-induced coma than it is to sleep. In a state of true general anesthesia, your brain's global activity is suppressed to a point where the different regions simply stop talking to each other. You aren't resting. You are being chemically disconnected from the very mechanisms that create a you in the first place. The chemistry of this disconnection is a brutal, effective hammer. Most of the time, the drug responsible for this is a milky white liquid called propofol, often nicknamed the milk of amnesia. When propofol enters your bloodstream, it heads straight for your brain's GABA receptors. Think of GABA as the brain's primary off switch. Under normal circumstances, your brain carefully balances these off switches with on switches to keep you conscious and alert. Propofol, however, kicks the door open and leans its entire weight on the off switches. It forces the GABA receptors to stay open, flooding your neurons with inhibitory signals. Within seconds, the electrical signals that usually zip across your brain at lightning speed begin to slow down and eventually stall out. It is a total molecular shutdown that happens so fast your consciousness doesn't have time to register its own demise. You aren't drifting off, you are being forcefully unplugged from your own sensory input. The reality of this shutdown is much darker than a simple nap. Once the drugs take hold, your brain enters a state known as burst suppression. This is a phenomenon where the brain's electrical activity becomes so low that it only fires in short, chaotic bursts separated by long periods of flatline silence. For a few seconds at a time, your brain is, for all intents and purposes, electrically dead. If a doctor saw this pattern in a patient who wasn't under anesthesia, they would assume that person had suffered a catastrophic brain injury or was minutes away from total brain death. Yet, in the operating room, this is the goal. We are pushing your biology to the very edge of the cliff, holding you there with a precisely calibrated drip of chemicals, and then pulling you back once the surgeon is done. The risk is immense, because the line between deeply anesthetized and permanently gone is remarkably thin. This is why the anesthesiologist is the most important person in the room. They are the one keeping you in the narrowest of margins between the void and the end. But the real mystery isn't what the drugs do to your cells, it's what they do to your self. To understand where you go, we have to look at how the brain creates the here in the first place. There is a leading theory in neuroscience called integrated information theory, championed by Dr. Giulio Tononi. It suggests that consciousness isn't a thing located in one part of the brain, like the heart or the lungs. Instead, consciousness is a property that emerges when different parts of the brain, the part that sees, the part that hears, the part that remembers, all talk to each other in a massive, high-speed network. When you are awake, your brain is a bustling city with millions of people talking, trading, and moving. Under anesthesia, that city is still there, and the individual people are still breathing, but all the phone lines have been cut and the roads have been blocked. The part of your brain that processes the feeling of a scalpel might still fire in response to the pain, but because it can't send that signal to the part of the brain that creates awareness, the pain effectively doesn't exist. You don't feel it because there is no unified you there to receive the message. The phone lines aren't just down, they are completely rerouted. This brings us to the thalamus, a small, egg-shaped structure sitting deep in the center of your brain. It acts as the grand central station for all your senses. Every sight, sound, and touch you experience passes through the thalamus before being sent to the cortex to be turned into a conscious thought. Research has shown that anesthesia specifically targets the thalamus, essentially turning off the relay station. This is why you can have your abdomen sliced open while under the influence of a drug like sevoflurane and not feel a thing. The signals are reaching the station, but the station is closed, the lights are off, and nobody is there to forward the mail. You haven't gone anywhere, you've just been fragmented into 1,000 silent pieces. This is where the nightmare begins for a very small number of people. There is a phenomenon known as anesthesia awareness, or intraoperative awareness, where the chemical wall between the void and the world fails. It is estimated to happen in about 1 or 2 out of every 1,000 general anesthesia cases. In these instances, the drugs that are supposed to keep the patient unconscious don't work as intended, but the drugs that paralyze the body work perfectly. The patient wakes up mentally while their body remains a frozen statue. They can hear the clinking of the surgical tools, the chatter of the nurses, and in the most horrific cases, they can feel the actual physical trauma of the surgery. They try to scream, they try to move a finger, they try to blink, but the paralytic drugs have locked their muscles in a chemical vice. It is a total isolation of the mind, a you that is fully present, trapped inside a corpse-like shell, waiting for the torture to end. The cause of this glitch is often a mystery of biology. Sometimes it's a matter of dosage, but other times it's a matter of genetics. Researchers have found that people with the MC1R gene, the one responsible for red hair, often require about 20% more anesthesia than the general population to reach the same level of unconsciousness. If a doctor doesn't account for this, the patient might linger in a twilight state where they are technically under, but still processing the environment. There was a landmark study called the GAPS trial in 2013 that looked into exactly how common this awareness is and how we can prevent it using brain monitors like the bispectral index, BIS. This monitor turns your brain's complex electrical signals into a single number from 0 to 100. 100 is wide awake, 0 is a flat line. Surgeons aim for a 40, but even at a 40, the brain is sometimes still listening in ways we don't fully understand. The quest to find the off switch is actually a very recent one. Before the mid-1800s, there was nowhere to go. If you needed surgery, you stayed exactly where you were, in a world of unimaginable agony. Patients were held down by 4 strong men, given a shot of whiskey or a piece of leather to bite on, and the surgeon worked as fast as humanly possible. A leg amputation could be done in under 30 seconds because speed was the only mercy available. That changed on October 16, 1846, in what is now known as the Ether Dome at Massachusetts General Hospital. A dentist named William T.G. Morton used a glass globe filled with ether to put a patient named Gilbert Abbott into a state of insensibility, while a tumor was removed from his neck. When Abbott woke up and said he had felt no pain, the lead surgeon, John Collins Warren, famously looked at the stunned audience and declared, "Gentlemen, this is no humbug." For the first time in human history, we had found a way to temporarily delete the human experience. But Morton didn't actually know how it worked, and neither did anyone else. For the next century and a half, we used ether, then chloroform, then modern gases like halothane, all without a clear understanding of the biological mechanism. We knew that if you breathe these things in, you went away, but the how was a black box. For a long time, scientists thought anesthesia worked by dissolving into the fatty membranes of your brain cells and physically changing their shape. This was called the Meyer-Overton hypothesis. It was a purely physical explanation. If you put enough gunk into the brain's wiring, the signals can't get through. But we eventually realized it was far more elegant and far more terrifying than that. It wasn't just gunk in the gears. It was a specific, targeted strike on the receptors that define our reality. This leads us to one of the most controversial theories in all of science. If anesthesia can turn consciousness off, then maybe consciousness itself is a physical, quantum process. This is the orchestra theory proposed by physicist Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. They suggest that consciousness happens inside tiny structures in our brain cells called microtubules. These microtubules, they argue, are where quantum vibrations occur, creating the soul or the self. They believe that anesthetic gases work by physically binding to these microtubules and stopping those quantum vibrations. If this is true, it means that under anesthesia, you aren't just shut down, your quantum state is being collapsed. It's a theory that most mainstream neuroscientists find radical and unproven, but it highlights just how desperate we are to explain the missing time. If consciousness is quantum, then the void of anesthesia might be the only time we are ever truly disconnected from the universe. The truth is likely a bit more grounded, but no less strange. When you are under, your brain's communication isn't just stopped, it's randomized. Think of a well-conducted orchestra. Every instrument plays its part, and the result is a beautiful symphony. This is your conscious mind. Anesthesia is like taking the sheet music away and telling every musician to play whatever they want, as loud as they can at the same time. The sound is still there, and the instruments are still working, but the music has disappeared. This is why you don't dream under general anesthesia. In normal sleep, the orchestra is still playing a quiet, rehearsed song. In anesthesia, the noise is so chaotic that no meaning can emerge. You don't have dreams because your brain can't even hold a thought long enough to turn it into an image. You are in a state of informational collapse. This collapse is why the waking up process is so incredibly messy. As the drugs begin to wash out of your system, the phone lines in your brain don't all come back at once. It's a staggered, chaotic reboot. Usually, the brainstem comes back first, the part of you that controls breathing and basic reflexes. This is why you might start coughing or fighting the breathing tube before you even know who you are. Then, the thalamus starts routing signals again, but the cortex isn't ready to process them. This leads to emergence delirium, a state where patients might swing at nurses, cry uncontrollably, or ask the same question 40 times in a row. Their brain is trying to rebuild the self from a pile of scattered parts, and sometimes the pieces don't fit right for a few hours. You might be awake in the sense that your eyes are open, but the you that normally lives in there hasn't been fully assembled yet. The physical toll of this reboot is often underestimated. For some people, especially the elderly, the going away part is easier than the coming back part. There is a condition called postoperative cognitive dysfunction, or POCD, where patients suffer from memory loss and mental fog for weeks or even months after surgery. It's as if the informational collapse was so profound that the brain had trouble finding the original blueprints to put itself back together. Scientists are still trying to figure out why this happens, but it suggests that the void of anesthesia isn't entirely harmless. Every time we turn the lights off, we are taking a gamble that they will all turn back on in the same way they were before. The mystery of the void eventually brings us back to the question of time. If you go under at 8 a.m. for a 6-hour heart surgery, you will wake up at 2 p.m., but your brain will insist it is still 8 a.m. In your internal timeline, those 6 hours did not occur. They aren't missing like a forgotten memory, they were never recorded in the first place. This is because the drugs don't just stop you from feeling pain, they stop the hippocampus from forming memories. You are essentially a biological VCR that has had the record button physically removed. Even if you were aware for a split second during the surgery, the amnesic properties of the drugs ensure that you will never know it. You are protected by a wall of chemical forgetting. This creates a terrifying philosophical dilemma. You are the sum of your memories and your continuous experience. Then who was on that table for those 6 hours? The body was there, the heart was beating, and the brain was firing in bursts, but the person was gone. This is the interruption of the self. In any other context, a 6-hour gap in your consciousness where you don't exist would be considered a tragedy or a death. In the operating room, we call it a successful procedure. We have normalized the act of stepping out of existence, and we do it so often that we forget how fundamentally unhuman the experience actually is. We are the only species on Earth that has learned how to turn itself off and on again. The science of anesthesia is essentially the science of the off switch. We have spent the last 178 years perfecting the art of the chemical void, yet we are still standing on the shore of a vast, dark ocean, wondering what's at the bottom. We know the molecular weight of the drugs, we know the voltage of the brain waves, and we know how to keep the heart beating. But the where remains elusive. When you go under, you don't go to a land of dreams, and you don't go to a place of darkness. You go to the only place that science cannot map, the absence of everything. You become a physical object in a world of subjects. You become a him or a her instead of an I. The danger of the void is the price we pay for the cure. We accept this risk because the alternative, the raw, unshielded agony of the knife, is worse. We trust the anesthesiologist to play the role of the ferryman, taking us across the Styx and, more importantly, bringing us back. We have turned the most terrifying prospect in the world, non-existence, into a routine medical appointment. And we do it with a confidence that masks just how little we truly understand about the you that we are temporarily deleting. Every time you count back from 10, you are performing an act of total, blind faith in the stability of your own biology. The reality of that faith is more fragile than you think. You trust that the person with the mask knows exactly how much milk of amnesia your brain can handle before the burst suppression becomes permanent. You trust that your thalamus will decide to open its doors again once the gas is turned off. You trust that your hippocampus will start recording your life again so you can remember the faces of your family in the recovery room. We take it for granted because it works so well, so often. But underneath the fluorescent lights and the beeping monitors, there is a profound silence that should haunt us more than it does. The silence is the answer to the question. Where do you go? You don't. You stop. You become a gap in the record, a glitch in the timeline, a person-shaped hole in the universe. And while that sounds like a philosophical abstraction, it is a cold, hard biological fact. We are the only creatures in the history of life that have mastered the ability to survive our own absence. We have turned the void into a tool and the nothing into a sanctuary. But we should never forget that the nothingness is real, and it is waiting just behind the count of 7. The assumption we all carry is that our self is a permanent, unbreakable thing. We think of our consciousness like a candle. It might flicker, it might grow dim, but the flame is always there until the very end. But anesthesia proves that the flame is an illusion. Your consciousness is not a candle, it is a high-speed data stream, and that stream can be paused, edited, and cut at any moment by a few milligrams of a synthetic chemical. We like to believe that there is a soul that lingers in the room while the body is being repaired, watching from the ceiling or floating in a peaceful light. But the data doesn't support that. The data shows that when the integrated information stops, the soul simply isn't there. The most haunting part of this is the math of the return. When you wake up, you feel like you are the same person who laid down on the table. You have the same memories, the same personality, and the same sense of humor. But biologically, you are a reconstructed version of yourself. Your brain has had to re-establish billions of connections that were forcefully severed. It has had to reboot its entire operating system from scratch. You aren't a continuous line. You are two separate segments of a line with a jagged, invisible break in the middle. We assume the two segments are the same person, but we have no way to prove it. We just accept the new you, because it looks and acts like the old you. The reality is that we are still living in the shadow of 1846. We have better drugs and better monitors, but we are still doing the exact same thing William Morton did. We are inducing a state we can't fully define to solve a problem we can't otherwise fix. We are still using chemicals to bridge the gap between life and the void. And while we've gotten very good at it, we are still playing with the most fundamental force in the universe. We are the masters of the off switch, but we are still just children playing with the wiring of a house we didn't build. The next time you're in a hospital, or the next time you hear someone talk about going under, remember the 60,000. Remember that today, a small city's worth of people will be chemically deleted and then, hopefully, reconstructed. It is the most common and yet most bizarre event in modern life. It is a testament to our brilliance and a reminder of our profound fragility. We are the beings who can go nowhere and come back to tell the tale. The assumption that you are a continuous being is the final thing you have to let go of before the mask comes down. You think that you are an unbreakable constant in your own life. But the truth is, your existence is a fragile, high-speed calculation that requires every part of your brain to be in constant, perfect communication. General anesthesia doesn't just put you to sleep, it proves that you are a temporary biological achievement that can be dismantled in exactly 30 seconds. On October 16, 1846, we didn't just discover a way to stop pain. We discovered that the human soul has an off switch, and we've been flicking it 60,000 times a day ever since. When you finally wake up and ask what time it is, you aren't just regaining your senses, you are being reassembled from the void, a brand new person with an old person's memories, standing on the other side of a gap that, for you, never even existed. Please consider subscribing if you want to keep exploring these rabbit holes with me, and let me know in the comments, does the idea of the void make you feel safe, or does it keep you up at night? For those 60,000 people today, the answer won't matter until they count back to 7.